And we are live again, back with another Boxing Squared live stream for another week. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining me. Just trying to flick a piece of hair out of my face here. My beard's starting to get a little bit unruly, but welcome to one and all. Hopefully, if you're listening on archive or live, you enjoyed the stream and that you've had a good week or whatever you've been up to. Hope you've had a good time and not pushed yourself too hard this week. A number of topics that I do want to cover. Wilder Ortiz, the rematch. It's creeping up pretty quickly. I've got a couple of topics that I wanted to just touch on and get your opinion on. Deontay Wilder in particular saying he wasn't hurt in the first fight, and he's got a couple of reasons to sort of couch it the way he has. Ortiz, he's had his full camp in Las Vegas, away from distraction, away from family. We'll get to some Patreon questions. There's a couple of heavyweight fights this weekend. It's another weekend where it's not exactly sort of brimming, full to the brim or anything like that. Kubrat Pulev fighting last week. We'll just touch in on that. Thoughts on that performance. Jagba will be fighting in December against Iago Kaladze. Joseph Parker and David Higgins. We'll have a couple of thoughts on that. Just want to get your opinion. And a couple of other things along the way. So just to get back off my list to the chat. So we've got 6 who've come into the chat so far. Hello to L-Dog there. Yes, please smash that like button. So first topic, I'll start it off just as people start rolling into the chat here. Deontay Wilder did his media conference call this week, and there were a number of interesting statements, and can't get to everything. There was like 30 minutes of Wilder waxing lyrical about all manner of topics. And I guess one of the things that has sort of been rolling around in my mind in regards to the rematch, and I did that video on it, which was sort of looking at the case for Luis Ortiz, because I have thought that Luis Ortiz is probably going to lose this rematch and Wilder wins it probably earlier and by a decent knockout again. But I guess the whole thing with this, it's heavyweight boxing. In 2019 we've seen some strange things. You never know what's going to happen, but I found it quite interesting with what Deontay Wilder said in this media conference call in regards to that first fight, the 7th round in particular. Very adamant that he was not hurt, and the way that he couched it was that he was buzzed, and he effectively said that, and I'll just go to my notes here, that he wasn't hurt, he was just buzzed, and that people used the term hurt the wrong way. And having watched that fight and watched it a number of times now, and I went back and watched that round 7, I mean, I do actually think that he's kind of overstating the whole buzzed thing, because to me it looked like he was hanging on for dear life and that he was more than buzzed and that he was actually quite hurt. And obviously the doctor and the commission thought he was hurt enough that they had to examine him prior to round 8. That, doesn't sort of indicate to me that it was just, one shot or 2 shots. He's a bit buzzed. Like, it took him some time to recover. And if you recall, Ortiz, although he was gassed in that 8th round, the round after that he, I believe, hurt Wilder, he actually landed a number of solid shots. But because he was effectively done in terms of his gas tank, he couldn't take advantage, and Wilder ultimately, as we know, got his legs back under him through rounds 9 and knocked him out in round 10. But this whole thing of buzzed and he wasn't hurt, and that people use the term hurt the wrong way, what do you make of this? Because I thought that was quite curious. So I'll just get back to the chat box here. So let's visit. Good morning to you, Adam Fahey. Kia ora to you too. Hello to Marcus. Hello to Bryce. Good evening, Unga. So Unga says, watching the pay-per-view from Australia while listening. Is this Paul Gallen one? I just can't bring myself to watch that. I know MBT Boxing, my good buddy, was tweeting about this earlier in the week, that it's $50. $50. That's Australian. For Paul Gallen facing Barry Hall. So clash of the codes. Paul Gallen, if you're not familiar with him, a former rugby league player. Barry Hall, I believe he's an AFL player. So $50. How they can command that. It sort of reminds me of the days when Joseph Parker was fighting Journeyman in New Zealand, and it was exorbitant prices for the fights that were getting dished up, $30 to $40 per pay-per-view. But this is worse. This is actually worse than that. Okay, so I'll get back to the chat here. So Noxus says, kia ora to you too. Adams Fahey says, Grandpa Ortiz lunches harder than we think. Or punches harder than we think. JPK World says, since you didn't make a video on it, what did you think of Bacoli versus Hernandez? I did cover this in the week after on a live stream, but because I didn't catch that fight live, I actually slept in. That was about 2 weeks ago. I was very impressed. I mean, him being able to stop Rodney Hernandez in 2 rounds, where Hernandez has, effectively gone the distance with a number of decent fighters and even upset the odd fighter. And he gave Joey DeWeco a very good fight, and I thought he beat DeWeco. This was only a few months ago. For Bacoli to basically and clinically run through him, very good performance. And I've done a couple of videos before, and I think this was maybe after the Wok fight with Bacoli. Maybe it was another one, but I can't keep doing the same sorts of videos. I did a video that was effectively saying, are fans now sleeping on Martin Bacoli? Whereas the opposite was sort of happening a year or two ago, when Bacoli, I think, was way overhyped in terms of what he'd actually achieved in the division. So just getting to the next question here. So Willab says, big up Boxing Squared, big up to you too. And apologies if I say your name or botch it, or something like that, say it wrong. Apologies in advance. Sometimes when you're trying to whip through and there can be some difficult names. Yeah, apologies in advance. So L-Dog says, he was so buzzed he couldn't feel or remember a thing. Yeah, I did think that it was, that over time Deontay Wilder in his mind must have sort of changed it from being hurt to buzzed, because I thought he was hurt. Him to just say that he was buzzed, I thought that was maybe stretching the truth just there slightly. So David McLean says, who is winning tonight, Gallen versus Hall? I mean, hard to say. I mean, have we seen much of... I mean, I know that there's the odd punch-up in AFL, so, I mean, I can't really speak to Hall. Gallen, I mean, he must go in the favourite. I think he's at short odds to win it. So Andre Van Rooyen says, Wilder is the best puncher next time he kills powder puff puncher Fury. Well, if he lands again like he did in that 12th round, Fury may not get up next time, but that's the question, in that rematch. Will he be able to land? And if so, can Fury get up? Because I think many of us expected if Fury survived the bell in the 12th, he was going to win. And that was a controversial result, that draw the first time. So Willard says, not heard too much about the upcoming Hughie Fury fight. That was announced... Oh, God, what was that? It was actually a live stream last week. I'll just type that... I was on the air when that promotional poster came out, so just bear with me a second. Hughie Fury box rec. If it loads. So he's facing Pavel Sauer, that's right. I sort of clipped the, dragged down the promo poster, clipped it, saved it to my Hughie Fury file and forgot about it. That's, if you haven't seen Pavel Sauer, so he got knocked out by Filip Hrgović in the first round, and this was, I think, in Hrgovic's second fight, but his most recent performance, Sauer's most recent performance, was against Jermaine Franklin, and somehow he managed to survive 10 rounds, looked dreadful in the process, but that sort of more said more about Franklin's performance as opposed to, Sauer boxing well, because he didn't. How he got through that, I think it was more down to Jermaine Franklin not being able to finish the job where he could have got it done. So Hughie Fury, I mean, he may be able to stop Pavel Sauer. I mean, it depends. If he does land a nice shot, one of those arcing right hands, as I sort of mentioned last week, can he come and just, swarm him and take him out? That was something Franklin couldn't do. But that's who he's fighting on that bill in Monaco. What's it? At the end of the month, I believe it is. So I'll get off box rec, get back to the chat here. So Unga says, watching for the Maloney brothers. Well, yeah, that really is the only sort of consolation on that card. But that really should have... I mean, but the money for the pay-per-view, that pays, these bigger paychecks. And I saw Lucas Brown, and we'll just divert to that, had a bit of a whinge on his Instagram earlier this week, and it's not for the first time. He's made comments like this before, that he says Aussie boxing is not in a good place. He uses much stronger language, but he says a lot of these cross-codes guys come into the sport and they're getting paid 10 times more than the actual boxers themselves. They waltz in, take the money, and these boxers are left, the other boxers are left looking, going, how do we get some of this? But I guess that's supply and demand. But if it's $50 and they don't, get many pay-per-view buys, then they'll drop it next time. But that sort of shows that indicates, at least, the fact that it's $50, and it's been $50 before for Gallon fights and all that sort of bits and pieces, and other people who've come in for these sort of one-off type pay-per-view events. There must be some demand, and people are buying it. For me, I wouldn't want to drop that sort of chunk of change on that sort of level of fight. Certainly not. But I know that others will, and I think it's on ESPN Plus in the United States. I think I saw an email about that, a press release of some sort. So Let's Visit says usually £20 in the UK. See, that's the thing. The UK market seems to be locked in, where there's a max of £20, and then it sort of wasn't KSI and Logan Paul like £10 or something. But there's sort of a window between that £10 and £20, whereas elsewhere it sort of seems to be like the wild, wild west. I think the Ruiz Jr. and Parker fight, that was $59.95 in New Zealand. And because it was a title fight, that was back end of 2016, I think most people weren't too fussed about it. But there have been other fights which have been really low-level fights involving Joseph Parker fighting Journeyman, $40 a fight, and you do feel dirty having paid it. So L-Dog says Paul Gallen versus Logan Paul 2020 at MSG for Undisputed. Okay. Bryce says, I heard Sonny Bill Williams wants to fight him. Well, they've been talking about that fight for a while, and there was some sort of talk. Gallen was saying, let's do $2 million each, 50-50, yada, yada, yada. To be honest, I'm not really interested in that fight. I know that Sonny Bill wants to... he's actually got built into his contract. So he's just signed a new deal over for the Toronto Wolfpack after having rounded out his New Zealand career, retired from playing from the All Blacks, etc. He's built into his contract that he can still box. But it's one of these things that, and I guess it's like a lot of these rugby league players that end up I guess he's a dual rugby and rugby league player. They kind of, dip in, dip out, and they do what Gallen is doing as well. But they're only ever going to get to a certain level, and it really is, you kind of see it for what it is. It's a money grab. That's really all it is. I don't see it as anything else, because I don't believe he wants to progress to the next step and challenge at a level that we'd ultimately want to see him at. So Right Hook Boxing is in the house. He says, what's up? What's up to Right Hook Boxing? Hope you got your computer issues fixed. So Unga says Doubtsley Bill will be allowed now that he's the 10 million man. Well, he's got something in his contract, as I was just mentioning. So L-Dog says SB Williams is going to be the heavyweight champion of the world when he beats the winner of Logan Paul versus Paul Gallen for Undisputed. Well, the sort of, sometimes when you see some of these guys that from other codes that come into boxing, it kind of looks like a glorified pub sort of brawl of some sort. So Logan Paul versus Paul Gallen, maybe there's not as bad a matchup as you think. So Adam Fahey says Bacoli needs a real test. Eddie always does this. Fight a D-level fighter, then straight in with an A- fighter. Classic price versus Povetkin. Be interesting to see what happens with Bacoli now, because I think just from what I had seen, just round the place through comment sections and that a lot of people were quite keen for Hughie Fury versus Martin Bacoli, because Fury is a tricky customer. He's not easy to knock out. He's got a decent chin. He makes it awkward and difficult. He kind of can stink out the place a little bit as well. But they're two guys at a certain level where you'd maybe say that that could be an interesting fight for different reasons. I would like to see that one, but he does need a decent step up now. There's a whole bunch of guys, and I did actually did a video on Patreon just a week or two ago that effectively 2020, because you've got all these belts tied up for rematches, mandatories, all that sort of stuff. What are a lot of these guys going to actually do? And each stable, because you've got these silos, the whole Top Rank and ESPN, PBC with Fox and Showtime, Sky, DAZN with Eddie Hearn, Matchroom, you could actually have all these little tournaments running off. And there's a whole bundle of fights within these different silos that you could make, and they should make. Because if you look at the actual schedule of what we're getting, it's not good enough. It hasn't been good enough in 2019. It's been pretty lackluster. And here we are, another weekend, this weekend, where there's basically, next to nothing on. You've got a couple of maybe, I don't want to say there's nothing on, but in terms of big quality fights, it's been a bit few and far between in 2019, whereas sort of 2018, it was almost every second week there was a decent fight, or there was at least something, 3 out of 4 weeks where you go, yeah, that's a good fight, even if it was at a certain level. Because, for example, this weekend, and this was a topic I was going to come to later, but I'll address it now. So you've got Junior Fa and Hemia Hill, 2 New Zealand heavyweights. They're fighting in Utah on a Ludabella card. But effectively, the level of the opponents, they're not 50-50s. In Fa's case, it might be an 80-20. In Hemia Hill's case, he's fighting Joshua Tufty. I mean, that's a 90-10 type thing. Fa is fighting Devin Vargas, and in of itself, it's not the worst fight ever, but it kind of seems like it's more of a tune-up, a comeback fight for Fa, who's been a little bit inactive this year. He's had a few personal issues that have cropped up, like the death of his father, etc. So this is maybe easing him back into the swing of things. But when you have those weekends where there's not a big fight on, or say a top 20 fighting, and we haven't had many top 20 fighting lately anyway, but you kind of want to see some at least decent 50-50s or something close to that, because sometimes it doesn't matter about how good they are in terms of where they're at the division, but you can have these really enjoyable competitive fights to watch, and they can sometimes be one of the better fights of the year. I mean, I remember back in 2017, one of my favourite fights of that year was that barn burner between Izu Agono and Dominic Breazeale. I don't think anyone saw that coming. It was just an all-out slugfest for 5.5 rounds. Okay, I'll just get down. So just getting back to Junior Fa, he's facing Devin Vargas. Hemia Hill is going to be facing Joshua Tufty. So that is being labelled the Toko Takeover. That will be on a UFC Fight Pass, and also if you live in New Zealand, they're going to be broadcasting it on Sky Sports Now. I think it's channel 50. I think that's at about 5 o'clock tomorrow, 5 p.m. New Zealand time. But, those two, Junior Fa and Hemia Hill, I mean, they need to step it up. There is these stories that I see in the New Zealand media, for example, which clearly they're not following the division to any real extent beyond who Joseph Parker is fighting, for example. Some of the story, I saw one the other day that said Junior Fa will have a title shot in 2020, and I was thinking, is it the IBO title or is it like the WBF title? Because it won't be any of the main titles, because that's just a fantasy. And if he ever wants to get to a title shot, he's got to step it up from the level of a Devin Vargas. But for this point, given a few things that have happened this year, I can let this one slide. But this year was meant to be a massive year for Fa, for example, a big step-up year. WBO ranked, WBO minor title behind him, the Oriental or Asia Oriental, whatever it's called. But it sort of just hasn't really had the momentum that I think he was expecting, and many others. I think people want to know, is Junior Fa actually a guy that could climb into the top 30 or, possibly go a bit further? He's got the size, he's got some of the skills. We'll have to see. It looks like 2020 would be one of those things where we see what's up. Where are we now? Sorry, the whole chat thing just... let me know your thoughts on those fights, though, from Utah. I just lost my place in the chat. Where are we? So L-Dog says, with Zelenoff entering the mix, I wouldn't be too sure. For Logan Paul. Well, that would be interesting, actually. I think Charlie Zelenoff, just, with his haymakers, it's kind of like a replica of sort of KSI to some extent. So Marcus says, did you watch the fight between Smikici and Kusubutsky? I did, actually. It was all one round of it, or whatever it was. Yeah, someone put up, if you don't follow him on Twitter and you want a guy that follows the heavyweight division really closely and has instant little teeny clips from fights, a guy called BDB, He does very good sort of live coverage as it's sort of happening, and he often has these really random sort of fights too that from far-flung places of the world. And that was a fight that sort of went under the radar, but yeah, Zhan Kosowutski, he really did actually make a bit of a statement in that one. He's unbeaten. What is he now, like? Is it 16-0 or was it 12-0? I can't remember whose record was which, but yeah, impressive performance. That was two unbeaten guys coming together, and I think that was one of the more, I think on paper at least, it looked competitive, but ultimately it ended up as a pretty brutal knockout. So Main Event Boxing Talk says, do you think Cha should be stripped of his WBA belt? Well, it's 2 years now. It's literally 2 years. And I just saw MBT into the chat. I remember ahead of that fight, MBT was on a live stream with Kiwi Box, who is now Big Boys Boxing, and they were talking about this fight coming up that weekend. And that was 2 years ago. It has gone fast. But as of the WBA, I mean, some of that's not Cha's fault because there has been issues around, Fraser Kendo and other bits and pieces, and obviously Cha himself, that issue with the drug test. And this is one of the things that sort of annoys me a little bit. I'm just going to sort of divert here. There seems to be some sort of narrative among some boxing fans that Cha had cleared the B sample. And it's just not, it didn't happen. He wasn't present at the opening of the B sample and didn't have a representative there. So he was going to take them to court. So the WBA threw its hands up and dropped it. So he didn't clear a B sample. And for that matter, neither has Tyrone Spong. And this is one of the things I'm seeing in a lot of comment sections talking about Tyrone Spong. He was clean and he cleared his B sample. We haven't had that B sample. What Spong put up on his social media was the results of another test. He was a little bit sort of economical with the information on that post, but it wasn't the results of the B sample. So I just wanted to get that off my chest there. So Unga says the WBA regular belt shouldn't exist, full stop. Well, they were trying to rationalise it down to one a couple of years ago with the tournament, just fell over immediately, and now we have 4 heavyweight champions in the WBA. You have Andy Ruiz Jr., Manuel Cha, the regular title holder, Joe Joyce with the gold belt, and Trevor Bryan with an interim title. It's madness. It is absolute madness. So L-Dog says, Unga, it's getting worse. They are now branding the WBA belt. They have removed regular. And I noticed that Manuel Cha says he's the WBA champion. There's no regular, no nothing. It's just he's a champion. It's almost like they're trying to do some sort of franchise champion type thing by default, just slyly over time by stealth. Adam Fahey says WBA need to order an interim tournament between Bryan and Joyce. Winner fights Cha, Manda. Well, there was going to be a tournament. They were talking about setting one up, 4-man tournament, Cha versus Kendo, and it was going to be Miller versus Bryan. Yeah, there was a 4-man tournament. Jarrell Miller was going to be part of it. But that was as the Joshua fight started to become an option, and ultimately he pulled out of that. So they were going to do it, fell over immediately, just like all their other tournaments. This is a joke. So L-Dog says, I want to go back to 2 belts, WBC and WBA. And even then, that wouldn't be perfect. L-Dog says that's the way we should still get unifications. Well, unification in the heavyweight division, that is just like a mythical unicorn at this point. Unga says, I want to go back to no belts, 1 champ, that's it. Well, how simple would that be? And you can sort of market the division on that to fans too. With 60,000 belts at the moment, it's just impossible. So Scott70 says, a real buzz here in Australia for the fight amongst non-fight fans. The event will do well. And that's the thing, that's sort of what I was alluding to as well. This is the Gallen and Hall fight, because the casuals are sort of invested in it. That's why the price is $50 for that pay-per-view, and will continue to be something like that because people will pay it. So JPK World says, what are your thoughts on Brown versus Hopoate? Yeah, not much. I mean, I didn't watch that live, but I did watch it hours after or the next morning on YouTube. Yeah, I mean, Lucas Brown, he looks pretty shot. And John Hopoate, yeah, it kind of looked like, two homeless guys fighting over a wedge of cheese. It wasn't great. Adam Fahey says Brown is fighting in working men's club. That Gallon Hall card is in an arena. That's the difference right there. Sit down with a rum and coke at the local and see a fight, or go out to an arena. Ruthless. Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, Lucas Brown is fighting in clubs now, so I guess he's devolved down to the level of a club fighter. I mean, he's got another fight coming up in, I think it's December, and then they're talking about Dempsey McKean for March, but that kind of feels like McKean and his people have sort of picked the right time to go, yeah, we're going to beat him. We're going to get some profile off the back of a guy who used to have a belt in the WBA, and move on from there. So King Frisbee says, sat in my bricklaying course. What, listening to the stream? Thank you for joining us. Right Hook Boxing says, good day to Scott 70. King Frisbee says, and do the winner of Povetkin vs Hunter get Dillian White? It's going to be interesting. This whole White situation is still bubbling along, and I've noticed that there has been a bit of a pullback in general with some of the fan sentiment towards White. Some people have, starting to forget or not as sort of hyped up about it, but it's still sort of swirling around, and they need that UCAD stuff to really dissipate to help White move on completely. Because if he doesn't get the all clear from UCAD, that will follow him at least for the next portion of his career. And his days of being a sort of pay-per-view sort of fighter in the UK might take a dip for a while as he looks to rehabilitate his image. Either way, if he's guilty or not guilty or whatever happens, I think the whole sort of silence hasn't helped his cause, especially with fans. So MBT Boxing is in the house. I was actually just talking about you before, mate, just mentioning about the $50 pay-per-view price for this Gallon Hall fight. Ludicrous, but as Scott 70 was saying, people are interested in Australia. So Todd says, Lucas Brown is right. This is the reason lots of boxers in the old day just gave up boxing and went to work. There was no money in Australian boxing. Good fighters just kept their day job, got married. And I guess that's like with a lot of sports and a lot of other pursuits, that sometimes the money isn't there and it ends up being a labour of love, and that, some people just keep going because they love the sport that much. And I guess Lucas Brown must fall into that camp. I think for some guys, though, I mean, like Brown, I think part of it is the money, but he obviously still enjoys doing that job. So Angus says, hey Boxing Squid, sorry for not catching up on the streams for some time. If you can catch them, you can catch them. I know it's not a good time for everyone around the world. For me, it just sort of 9:30 New Zealand time just seems to be a good time I can get it out. But wherever you are, in the world, thank you for joining the stream, and smash that like button if you can. And I know for some places, especially with daylight savings changing in the UK, it's a slightly earlier time than it once was just a couple of weeks ago. So L-Dog says, why can't Eddie start feeding some of these guys to Hrgovic? I'm getting quite frustrated at Eddie neglecting Hrgovic. At this rate, Dubois might surpass Hrgovic because of Frank Warren's matchmaking. Not really. I mean, Frank Warren's been matching Dubois with the likes of Tete and Fujimoto. It's some of the guys that Hrgovic has been facing are no worse than that. But I take your point about making some of these matches that they could make within the Matchroom stable. They've got to start having a bit of and I know that some of these guys don't want to take the risk, and it's all about them trying to position themselves for a title, but they've got to also be realistic at the same time. Sometimes they're going to need to take a hard fight if they really want to get to that title shot, because that's the only way that they'll get some cut through with some of the sanctioning bodies, but also with fans. I mean, how many times do we want to see some of these, rising prospects or, guys who are legitimate contenders just having sort of tune-up fights? It's been ridiculous this year. So Gigi Allen says, are there any heavyweight fights this weekend? Well, there's a few. I did cover just before. Junior Farr is facing Devin Vargas. We've got Hemia Hill on the same card. This is in Utah. He's facing Joshua Tufti. But apart from that, and I've got up, this was one of the things I was going to get to a bit later. Where are we? I brought up the schedule. But apart from that, there's not too much else around the place. You do have in Germany, there's a card that Hussein Muhammad, he's 13-0. He's facing Jakub Saglam. That's a former Joseph Parker opponent. Hussein Muhammad actually has been in camp recently with Anthony Joshua. Also in Germany, you've got Eric Pfeffer. He is actually facing Adnan Redzovic for the WBO European heavyweight title. That European title is just being passed around and put in the trash just like after every single person wins it. They don't defend it. It just seems to be bouncing around like crazy. And Redzovic, I actually did, there was a fight earlier this year with Ali Aaron Demirezhin with Redzovic. I've got some highlights up on my other channel, 99 Boxing. That's going to be that's Eric Pfeffer is 6-0. He's a prospect. Adnan Redzovic will come in. He'll be heavy. If the pace gets too much, he'll just look for a way out. In that fight against Demirezhin, it was terrible. He's spitting out his mouth guard, all sorts. On that same card, this is, and that's actually going to be on MDR and ESPN Plus from here with the broadcast details. Heavyweight prospect Peter Queredo, he's also on that card. He's 5-0 at the moment. In Jamaica, you've got Vladimir Tereshkin. He is going to be fighting. He's 21 with wins with 1 draw on his record. He's facing Francisco Silvans. But apart from that, it's not a lot. You've got Hazim Murakman Jr. He's going to be fighting in Maryland. He's 8-0. But, there's not a lot on in terms of quality fights. And this is what I was sort of talking about earlier. Not a lot of, big fights or even sort of, top 30 type fights that we've been maybe spoilt in the last year or two. It just doesn't seem to be happening this year. So Jason Landis says, simple way to solve the boxing problem, too many belts, is to have leagues. That could be one way to do it. But as I was sort of alluding to earlier, all of these different promotional silos, they could have a tournament in 2020 if they wanted to. They all have enough to have either a 4, 6 or 8-man tournament that you could run over the course of a year, and that could build some prestige for the winner, or if someone performs well in that, for their career, and to work towards a mandatory position. So Al Dog says lineal is just a joke now, and he also says I think the Ring Magazine belt is the new lineal. Well, often confused the two are, but it's just another thing that people track boxing with, the different sort of belts that are out there and honours, and it gets a bit much. And Kelby says, and the Gypsy King has the ring as well. No, he was stripped of that. That was a couple of years ago while he was off on his sabbatical. David says, lineal does not exist. The lineage was broken when James J. Jeffries retired as undefeated heavyweight champion in 1904. But that's the thing. The lineage you can start the lineage again, or certainly I believe that. And there's a great video that Rummy's Corner did on this, that about the lineal champion status and tracking it and picking up new lineage. So, I enjoyed that one. That must have been about a year ago. So Unga says Junior coming in at 267.5, way too heavy. Is he serious? I actually thought it was 277 because I actually just put up on Twitter about an hour ago a little sort of clip of the highlights, and I had to, because Junior Farr posted that footage of the weigh-in in Utah to his Facebook page, and I had to boost the audio seriously just to hear, and to me I thought it sounded like 277. So he was facing Devin Vargas, who was 218. Joshua Tufti was 269, and Hemio Heel was 231, and for a heel that's about his normal weight. But for Farr, who I thought I heard it as 277, but even at 267, that's significantly more than his last fight, which is against Dominic Gwynn, where he was 259. So AA Boxing in Blunts, welcome to the chat. He says WBO Oriental got Parker his title shot. Farr won't get that leg up. I guess the thing is with Parker, he had a whole number of other belts as well, but he was taking steps up. And remember, you had that eliminator with Carlos Takam too. So, and another guy like Alexander Dimitrenko, for example. But Farr hasn't sort of fought that opposition yet. Alexander Dimitrenko would easily be the best name on Junior Farr's record. So L-Dog says, of Farr's weight, 267, no way he should be in the 240s. L-Dog says Kosobutsky is a good prospect in my opinion. Certainly been like a number of other heavyweights around the world who are sort of campaigning outside of, bigger markets like the US and the UK. A lot of these other heavyweights don't get a lot of love, but he's sort of been well under the radar. But that knockout, that will certainly get him on the radar to some extent. Maybe not completely. So I'm just seeing Adam Fahey react to Far's weight. I'm certain I heard 277 because I boosted that so much because it was really, really low and it sounded like 277 to me. And he did look a little soft around the middle. So Feroz Khan says hello from across the ditch. Hello to you too, Feroz. Double A Boxing and Blunt says he's a massive McGregor fan, but Cash is Glaswegian. I'm going to say a draw. Okay, I've picked up on the conversation there. Not sure what that one was about. I will just scroll down here. Lots of conversations. Then I'll get to my next topic. I'm slowly catching up on the chat. So I call Bullshit says, do you enjoy Tyan Booth's videos? Yeah, I haven't been watching as many lately. I think some of the repetition, because I had watched basically over the past year most of them, so some of the gags and the names maybe I'm getting a little bit tired of, but yeah, still very entertaining guy. MBT says, as bad as washed as Brown is, he probably still beats prime Hopewadi. Hopper never been a good boxer, just good for a crossover from rugby. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, Hopewadi, like some of these other guys that retire from rugby league after some paydays, and they can't compete at a high level in rugby league anymore. Their days are done, but they think they can give boxing a go and make a go of it. And sometimes, some of them have. I mean, I think we're seeing that Paul Gallen, he's not really faced anyone of note, is earning pretty decent money right now. There's like Solomon Hamono, he's done, even though he's really sort of at journeyman level, he's had a couple of opportunities where he's made decent money over the years. So Stacks on Deck says, is it true Dillian White has been shot? Okay, I'm not sure what that's about. I haven't heard anything about that. There's a debate about Hopewadi in the chat here. So Martin says, Boxing Squared, why do you knock Pulev for not finishing opponent, never been KO'd? Well, part of the reason that Rydell Booker's never been KO'd was he was in 12 years in prison. But that was another topic, and I'll get to it now because Kubrat Pulev could have and should have done better in there. There was a number of Bulgarian fans that came to my post-fight video after it was up, not very happy with some of the commentary from it. It was a win, sure, but Rydell Booker was there for the taking. His body was wide open, his corner was imploring him to throw body shots, but Pulev just couldn't bring himself to do it. There was an opportunity to take Booker out. He could have been stopped. His corner was identifying, you need to work the body. He threw one left to the liver and a few right hands to the body throughout. And every time he threw a body shot, Pulev was getting a reaction from Rydell Booker. Clearly didn't like it, but he kept headhunting. And Rydell Booker was covering up and blocking a lot of those punches. Sure, there was some going through the guard or around the guard, but there was an opportunity to get him out of there. And because he laboured to some extent, it looked like Booker was clearly gassing and fading, but Kubrat Pulev just wouldn't mix it up, wouldn't follow his corner instruction. And if he fights like that against Andy Ruiz Jr. or Anthony Joshua, whoever wins that fight, he's going to get stopped. He's going to lose the fight. He can't just keep doing the same thing and expect, it's just going to, walk through and knock someone out. Booker is too crafty for that, and we saw, good defense. So there's my rant on Pulev. So L-Dog says, maybe I need to offer Kelly some cocaine. Okay, I'm not sure what that's about. But I did see, and this reminds me from the World Boxing Super Series final the other week. there was some rounds where Kelly Sauerland, clearly he was sort of first or second row, and I was watching him because the action was the camera was at such an angle, and man, he just those clips where they have him looking like he's very uncomfortable and something's wrong and he looks like he might be hopped up on something, same thing again, and it just cracked me up. Okay, I've just got to get my place back here. Sorry about that. You scroll down like a teeny bit and it takes you like 100 comments. So Angus says, Boxing Squared, I'm in New Zealand, but where does JP go to from here? I don't think he can get a fight with Chisora, in my opinion. And that's another topic on my list. We sort of talked about this to some extent last week. So we've had Joseph Parker coming out with a tweet almost begging Derek Chisora to get into negotiations, fight him instead of Alexander Usyk. Don't let David Haye take you the Usyk risk. We'll have to see, but it's interesting how things have flipped now that Derek Chisora, who was looking for a big payday somewhere, and Joseph Parker looked like that might be the best available. Now he's got some options. And remembering he's only had a couple of wins over the guys like David Price and Artis Bilker, guys who are at the back end of their career, a little bit shot, but Chisora is on the rise now, and Parker seems to be chasing that fight as opposed to that's a fight he can get now. But I don't want to see Joseph Parker in another tune-up, so I hope Eddie Hearn is not going to put him out in January or February in some sort of low-level halfway up a card against someone that we don't want to see. We already saw that. I mean, we know it's not his fault that because of the spider bite or whatever happened, but he hasn't fought, and he's only had one fight in 2019, so it's a massively disappointing year for him at a time when he's actually been spending time and more effort on keeping his weight under control, not blowing up to 260, 270. But he needs to squeeze Eddie Hearn for a decent fight. There's a number of guys in that matchroom stable who need to sort of say to Hearn, I need something a little bit better, because you can't just bring in sort of some of these one-sided, lopsided opponents every single time out, because it starts to get a bit boring. I'll just actually get to a couple of Patreon questions while I'm at it. So we've got a question from Toby who says, what are the 5 fights you want to see most in boxing next year? So if we're talking boxing in general, I would like to see the Fury and Wilder rematch happen. I'm not convinced it will. I'd like to see, I'll just toss this out here, whoever's got the belts by the end of 2020, a unification, because I know that there's some talk about unifying the division. Say if Ruiz wins, that he's going to fight Wilder potentially, and they'll have a undisputed fight. But that sort of forgets that the IBF has already ruled and says Pulev's got to have his shot before the end of May. So I think, and this will be the point where some people will say, and do say in comments, undisputed overrules mandatories. Yeah, well, that is if an order hasn't already come down. They've said Pulev must get a shot, so you can't get away from that. And we've already been talking about, it's been almost every week, the same stuff regurgitated about the winner of the Ruiz-Joshua fight is going to have to drop a belt. So we can't forget that. So undisputed may actually not happen until all mandatories are taken out of the year, which the earliest would seem to be the end of next year, but all things being equal, it probably means never, because that's just what we seem to be used to in the heavyweight division. So undisputed would be one. I'd like to see that fight between Errol Spence and Terence Crawford, but marination and all that sort of stuff, they will prohibit that. But also now with Spence after this car crash, who knows what's going to happen there. What else would I like to see? It's a good question. But if we're talking about heavyweight fights, I'll just chuck a couple in there. If Dillian Whyte is cleared, I wouldn't mind seeing him fight the winner of Povetkin and Hunter. That would be a good fight. And just trying to think. I'll just keep mulling that one over for another fight. But yeah, there's a number of good matchups that can be made across a lot of divisions. But I wouldn't mind seeing, I guess, some of the lower weight classes. And I know this probably won't happen because of promotional and politics, all that sort of stuff. But Lomachenko versus Gervonta Davis, that would be interesting. Now that they're in the same division, why not? And I know that there would be a number of people that would just say Lomachenko takes it, but Davis is one of these guys who has all the tools, but they're just wasting his talent against guys. He's overmatched opponents and bringing up guys from other divisions. But that would be a good fight. Okay, next Patreon question. So Scott says, if you had to make a call now, do you think Wilder Fury rematch will happen on 22nd Feb, and do you think a trilogy will take place? Well, I've said for a while, I've always thought that a 3-month turnaround for Deontay Wilder from November to the 23rd to the 22nd of February is quite, that's tight for him. He hasn't done that in years. So I've always thought that sort of turnaround, because if he picks up an injury, it could be 6 months before he's ready. And he was injured after that Brazil fight. I mean, people forget he picked up an injury in there. I think it was his left arm. Fortunately, it wasn't the right arm, which seems to be like paper mache and get beaten up and broken half the time. Fortunately for him, it was the left arm, but there was something wrong with it. And for me, part of the reason I think that there was this big gap between the mandatory, which was in May, and now, I think he was rehabbing an injury. And Wilder has before in his career actually admitted after the fact that he was injured. So it wouldn't surprise me if we hear in the sort of few days or a couple of weeks after this fight coming up against Luis Ortiz that Wilder was injured earlier this year. There was a case of it, what was it, in 2017, or was it? Yeah, it must have been. And he admitted that he'd gone, he had to sort of stretch things out a little bit because he had been injured. He was rehabbing an injury to his right hand. And a final Patreon question, and if you do want to sign up to Patreon, www.patreon.com/boxing squared. So weekly videos on topical issues from $1 a month. So L-Dog says, if Alexander Usyk unifies the heavyweight division by beating Deontay Wilder and the Anthony Joshua-Andy Ruiz winner, where would you rank him among the greats? Well, I think if he was to unify the heavyweight division, and I think even if he just picks up a belt and it's a good fight, a credible opponent, he probably, given his feats at cruiserweight, he probably would be considered, someone destined for the Hall of Fame. But if he was to beat, these top guys like an Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, whoever happens to be in possession of a strap and he fights them, he probably will be considered, especially if he was able to rack up a couple of defenses against credible opposition. He'd probably go down as an all-time great given the work that he did at cruiserweight. And if he was able to unify in two different divisions, I mean, not many people do that, especially fighting good opposition. So we'll have to see. But Alexander Usyk is a bit of a dark horse in the division. It remains to be seen, with some of these guys that are a lot taller. They've got the reach advantage, power advantage. We haven't seen him maybe, take a shot that we'd like just to see judge him by. But obviously, he in the amateurs, he fought a lot of big, tough, strong guys. We'll see. So getting back to the chat here before I get to my next topic. I'm way behind on the chat here. It seems to happen every week. We're already 48 minutes into the live stream. So welcome one and all, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining the Boxing Squared live stream every Friday at 9:30 p.m. New Zealand Standard Time. So I will just, where I'll find my place again. So Daniel Hale says, who would you want Usyk to fight for the WBO belt? I would want to see Kovnatsky, as he's a higher level than Chisora and has done more in recent times to earn his shot than Joseph Parker. I mean, you can make a case for that. I mean, he's probably one of these guys. I mean, Parker, he's had a title shot, became a champion. I mean, Chisora's had a previous title shot. I mean, Kovnatski at this point in his career, he's fresh meat for a title shot. There is something to be said about fresh up and coming guys coming up in the division and getting their shot. That's why I wouldn't have minded seeing Wilder facing Kovnatski, because it was a fresh name, a fresh opponent. But can he get a title shot? I mean, he's probably not going to. I mean, depends where things end up settling with the rankings. So after December, after the Ruiz-Joshua fight, things will become a little bit clearer, depending on who's the champion, what they're going to work out with sanctioning bodies, because it could be a deal that gets worked out to see the WBO pushed out to later in 2020 to be defended. We'll have to see. Maybe Ruiz Jr., if he wins, he won't want to have a part of that. The PBC and their whole WBO thing, maybe he would drop the belt. That opens it up for Usyk, and Usyk v. who? We'll have to see. But I have noticed a lot of people saying that they think that Usyk is going to be fighting Derek Chisora. At the moment, in terms of rankings, Chisora's not high enough up. He's actually not in the WBO rankings at the moment. The next update, which generally comes around the 22nd, the 23rd, because he picked up that Intercontinental title, he will roll straight somewhere into the top 10. But at the moment, in the rankings, it looks like Joseph Parker is the next cab off the rank. But given he's not fighting for a title fight if there was a vacant belt. But remembering, Usyk, if there is a vacant belt, he can't just choose the opponent. It would depend on the rankings and where things sit with that. Because the likes of Fury and Joshua, at this point, they're above Joseph Parker, for example. But obviously they've got fights coming up, and after they have them or whatever, or lose, say if Joshua lost, he would drop down. We'll see where things go. So Patrick says, when do you think Junior Fa will fight a top contender? Well, it's a good question. I think he was trying to build towards fighting someone in a 50-50 type fight this year, but circumstances haven't seen that line up. But you'd have to think, if Junior Fa is going to make some noise in the division, 2020 has to be the sort of year where he steps up past the Devin Vargas type opposition. I mean, consider this: when Andy Ruiz Jr. was coming back from his 13 months off after his loss to Joseph Parker, he fought Devin Vargas as a tune-up fight. So Devin Vargas, even though he can box a bit, decent skills, in the context of the heavyweight division, he is an opponent and seen as such by different heavyweights. And the fights that he's been in terms of against top heavyweights, generally they've been using him as a warm-up type fight. So Fa's got to look good against Devin Vargas, and if he does struggle to any extent, remembering he was dropped against Dominic Gwynn, 44-year-old Dominic Gwynn in his last fight out, I think the jury will be out about how far he can go, but it's all there for him to do and prove how far he can go. So Unga says, MBT, do you think Dwight Ritchie's death will affect Zerafa in the Horn fight? It's quite interesting, actually, because as soon as I heard that, and that he'd been sparring with Zerafa, I wondered what that was going to do to Michael Zerafa, his mental state, and if actually, one, the rematch would happen as intended on the date it's meant to go down on, or two, what would it take from Michael Zerafa? It's a really interesting question, Unga, and I'll be interested to see what MBT actually has to say about that. So Daniel Hale says, do you worry that this is a golden era of heavyweight fighters won't live up to its expectation, with big fighters fighting twice a year, Wilder's constant injuries, and Fury saying he has 3 more fights? I mean, I think there was optimism. There might have been a golden era in the heavyweight division, especially after a cracking 2018. Last year, when you compare it against this year, it's night and day. It was a great year last year for heavyweight boxing, but it's just been so insipid this year. And you can't say that it's a great golden era of heavyweight boxing based on what we've seen this year and some of what we're getting. But the inactivity and the constant mismatches and fighters sometimes only fighting once a year, it doesn't help the division at all. So L-Dog says Fury sounds like he's trying to avoid Wilder. I think we all know why as well. Well, if they don't end up fighting in February, and it's Fury who's pulled out of the fight for whatever reason, I think that narrative will certainly sort of start to take hold. Remembering that Fury was the one that pulled out of the immediate rematch because he signed the deal with ESPN and Top Rank, who wanted him to have a couple of not warm-up fights, but showcase fights to build him up to an ESPN audience for a pay-per-view when they did rematch. And I have seen some people trying to work a narrative that it was Wilder who pulled out of the rematch, not Fury. But, I think some people have either got short memories or they're crazy. So Ty Z HD says, "Hi Boxing Squared, who do you think would win between Pulev and Usyk?" That's pretty interesting. I would just have to go with the younger man here in Usyk. But Pulev, if he worked his jab and if he was able to use movement, I think it would be a competitive fight for several rounds before Usyk started to wear a Kubrat Pulev down. And it was interesting, that fight, just one thing about the Kubrat Pulev and Rydell Booker fight, that jab wasn't quite as on point in that fight as it usually is. And I think against a guy like Alexander Usyk, if they fought, he'd have to be using that thing like a ramrod. It would have to be a real weapon used constantly. So Jason says Joseph Parker's record blows Wilder's out of the water. The Kissum says Fury vs. White tag team WWE MMA. Oh yeah, I saw a few comments this week regarding the whole Tyson Fury going to MMA crossover. For me, I just think that's just hype. It's bluster. He's got no intention of going there, but all of these statements in the media, it really does, serve a purpose. He's building his profile in the United States. He's getting into war of words with Dana White and other people. But for me, if my personal opinion is Tyson Fury would get absolutely battered in MMA. He might be good, in terms of being a very tall, skillful boxer, but if it's lights out if he gets taken down to the ground. I think there'd be a lot of guys that would take Fury down with ease inside the octagon, and I don't think that a fight between Fury and any MMA star at any real level, it's not going to be competitive in my view. It's kind of like some of these guys who come to boxing and it's not going to end well, and it doesn't end well. I mean, that McGregor fight with Mayweather was carrying him in those opening rounds to make it look credible. So MBT Boxing, so he has answered Unger there. Unger, good question. This is the Zarafa one with the recent death. Unfortunately, I think it'll hurt him mentally and his drive to be destructive. Horn needs all the advantages, in my opinion. See the same result, but this may change the detail of the outcome. Yeah, that's a great answer. As soon as I heard that, I thought, what is that going to take from Michael Zarafa? So Unger says, as per DeBella, Junior Far 267. Okay. L-Dog says, Tyzy HD, anything but, okay, I've missed that conversation there. Scrolling down the chat here. So Willard says Brown versus Brigg, who would win? Maybe not the boxing fan. That doesn't seem like a very good or competitive fight to me. If that was like 5 years ago, you might kind of go, yep, that's something that we want to see. But I just can't, I wouldn't. I mean, I know Shannon Briggs is not retired, but is he retired? If you know what I mean. So Adam says boxing over in the US is just not big enough anymore with the big three, NFL, NBA, and MLB, all talking a lot more. TV time is one reason. Okay. I missed obviously that part of the chat. So William Leahy says Gallen's a joke. JB says AJ puts Ruiz away early. Yeah, I'm not so sure it's going to be early. I mean, if you look at, there sort of seems to be a bit of a misconception about a lot of these heavyweight boxers that They just stop all these guys, early. And if you take out one or two results, a lot of these guys, their opponents, most of them go, some rounds, over half the fight at least. So Unger World's top 5 fights for next year: Beterbiev versus Bivol, Canelo versus Smith, Loma versus Haney, Spence versus Crawford, Inoue versus Obuali. So Lubak says, kia ora Boxing Squad, kia ora to you too. Oh, and Unger says Taylor versus Ramirez. That would be a good fight. Very good fight. There's a lot of interplay between comments here. God of War says, good morning Boxing Squared in chat, just stopping by, leaving a like. Thanks for stopping by, I appreciate that, God of War. So Kevin 8 Poison says, Klitschko is coming back, ? I did see that in the last week or two with some comments alluding to a potential, but this is rinse and repeat from Klitschko every sort of 3 months, and I don't know if he feels like he needs some attention, or people have taken their eye off him or something and he wants to get a few headlines. But I mean, I've stopped covering it, but just because it becomes so repetitive every few months, it's like Groundhog Day doing the same video. If he's legitimately coming back and isn't cryptic and he announces that he is coming back, well, I'll cover it, and he might be able to have some success in the division. But yeah, it remains to be seen what he's going to do. I mean, at the moment he's just toying with us, but we'll see. So Jason says Wilder throws too many shots to the back of the head. It's unacceptable. And that was something that Ortiz's trainer has picked up on in the media conference call. If you caught that video that I did, and I've got the full versions of that up on my backup channel. I split them up into the two. Ortiz's segment is about 20 minutes. His trainer Herman Caicedo talking there for Ortiz as a translator, but also throwing in his thoughts too. He actually mentioned a lot of Deontay Wilder's, as he called it, illegal punches. So he was very adamant that, and he was making a point of it. So whether we'll actually see the referee pick up on any of that, but I guess it's a tough job sometimes. If Wilder is really going into windmill mode, it can be hard to pick some of that stuff up in a flash. We'll have to see what happens. But Hayden says YouTube boxing is cringe. I want to see skill, not fame. Yeah, there's a real sort of division among fans at the moment about the success or otherwise of that card last week, and whether it was good for boxing or not. Certainly the card itself was not great, and there were good showcase opportunities for Devin Haney and Billy Joe Saunders, which I don't think they necessarily capitalised on. I thought Saunders looked bang average for a lot of that. But in terms of overall getting some eyeballs to the sport, I mean, it's hard to say how many people will stick around and keep watching boxing. But it did bring, at least, to the public's attention, the general public, some attention to boxing. So in some ways, it can't be bad. But, obviously there was, as you say, a lot of cringe about it too. So Jason Landis says, Boxing Squared versus Counterpunch Boxing pay-per-view. What? Oh, you mean in terms of YouTube channels? It'd be quite interesting. I think you'd have to really make something like that work. I mean, I'm on like the far-flung country, across the ocean. You'd need to have YouTubers in a similar location if you'd ever work something up like that. It'd be quite interesting. I mean, I'm sure because there's a number of British YouTubers that I think could actually, they live quite in close proximity. You could actually even have a tournament. I love tournaments. But in terms of me fighting other YouTubers, I can't really see that being on the cards. Probably no one would buy the pay-per-view either. So Hayden says, I just prefer close fights, not someone just getting steamrolled in a round like Dubois' opponents. And we saw that coming with Ebenezer Tete, that he was going to be overmatched. He looked dreadful in some of the footage that was available. And it's similar for Fujimoto. It's a paycheck, and, he's probably going to retire from the sport afterwards. He might need that money for some medical bills. I noticed he had his press conference in Japan, and he brought someone in a panda suit, and that if he's going to be fighting a bear, he needs to train with it. It was cringe. But I'm glad he's got a sense of humour, because he is going to get sparked, and badly. It's, it is what it is, I guess. But, I'd rather see less of those types of fights. But on the plus side, I mean, how long have we been talking about Kyotaru Fujimoto? And there's another of... I just see Scott 70 saying boxing squared versus right hook boxing would be a war. Now that would be another first round job, and I'm Dubois in that situation. It'd be lights out. Kovnatsky versus Ruiz would be a tear up, says Lubak. Yeah, it would be, and that was a fight that I think probably would have ended up getting made. I mean, Ruiz wanted that fight, but then obviously he got that opportunity for Anthony Joshua, and he's never looked back. So L-Dog says, apparently Arum wants to make Lomachenko versus Inoue. Way to ruin Inoue's career. Versus Inoue. I mean, they'd have to do that at like 126. So, I mean, just for because Inoue would be coming up, Lomachenko would have to go down. There's no way you could do that at like 130 or 135. That wouldn't be fair to Inoue. Ungus says, talking to Scott there. So Hayden says, if you think Wilder will win, you're going to lose. That's all I'm saying. Well, the rematch against Ortiz. I think he goes in the favourite for a reason, because we've seen that fight. He won it. But, yeah, I mean, Ortiz is in that fight. So Lubak says, why is Farr so highly ranked? He's got a minor WBO title. Those do matter in the WBO. And he needed to have this fight really to continue to, probably, because the WBO, if you recall, they dropped Fujimoto and Zhili Zhang out of the rankings because of inactivity. And in Fujimoto's case, he was facing a guy called Sutat Kalalek, fought him twice in the past year, and the guy was a former middleweight. That's the opposition. That's the fight that he's coming off to go into a Dubois fight. He's going to get rolled, and badly. So Faraz Khan says, we need Don King to make the big fights. I mean, for all, the crap Don King gets, he did put on a lot of big nights, especially big heavyweight nights. So Jason says, Fury has bipolar, so would take what he says with a pinch of salt. I mean, it is hard to sort of take a lot of what he says seriously sometimes when he backtracks the next week, but I'm hoping that that fight does come off in February, that he does fight Wilder again, but I'm not holding my breath either. The short turnaround, the cut from Fury, I mean, Wilder could get injured. I mean, let's face it, if the date, because at the moment they've booked the venue or whatever, there's a lot of reasons they wanted to have it on that date. The PBC will just end up filling it with another pay-per-view, like a Pacquiao versus someone. That's probably what's going to end up happening. So Skater says it might be good for Zerafa if he's dedicating his fighting career to his memory, or it could be completely break him. Yeah, I mean, with Richie having died and Zerafa sparring him and all that, yeah, like I was saying earlier, and MBT alluded to as well, instantly I was thinking, that can't be good for him. It's not going to help his mental state in the lead up to probably the biggest fight of his career. So Jen scans Vitizen says Usyk for sure. Usyk would outwork Pulev, take his spirit and get the stoppage. Yeah, I could see that, like I was alluding to earlier, being competitive, but then Usyk starting to take over, sort of, a la what he did to Tony Bellew and so many others. He might take some shots, but ultimately, he probably takes over at some point. So Adam Fahey says, at Boxing Squared, your thoughts on a Jagba versus Kaladze on the Harrison-Charlo bill. I think this really must be a Jagba's last before a decent step up towards maybe a Martin or Washington. And interesting that you mentioned that, and it is on my list to cover. Actually, I should see what I have. We covered Wilder Ortiz, some of their statements, Patreon, Pulev, Jagba. So before I came on, I was in the middle of editing a video. So that will go up within about half an hour or so after the stream finishes. I'll get back to editing and I'll put it up. See, I know that, and I don't want to give too much away, but on the back of, he hasn't been in the ring since July. He pulled out of a fight in, when was it, October? Whenever it was, against Jack Mulawai. He was drafted in at somewhat late notice, 2 weeks before, and then got a back injury the week of the fight. And you look at Kaladze, and people might go, oh, this is a joke. But there's actually a few things going for that fight, but in the context of an 11-0 guy fighting Iago Kaladze, I don't mind it. And I'll go through the video with some more reasons for that. And don't sleep on the fact that Kaladze might be able to take him some rounds. As I talk about in that video, he took Adam Kovnatsky 6 rounds. Joe Joyce, 5 rounds. Michael Hunter, 5 rounds. So I could sit, and there's a few reasons for that. But he's one of these retreads for the PBC as like a gatekeeper. And because remember, he had that fight earlier this year against Robert Alfonso, and that was a split decision draw. And I think a lot of people thought that Kaladze actually won that, and not because he did an amazing job. It was more that Alfonso was just incredibly disappointing. I mean, just when I was trying to remember and recount that fight earlier when I was doing some prep for the Jagba video, I was thinking, yeah, it wasn't so much that I came out of it thinking he'd done an incredible job. It was more that Alfonso just really disappointed, and it was at that point I thought, nah, he's not going anywhere. And I know that sounds brutal, but that's just sometimes the way it is. And Scott70, thank you for the super chat there, my man. That's great. I appreciate that. So David says, do you think AJ is on steroids? Do boxers like MMA fighters get a therapeutic dose exemption, meaning they can run a TRT dose for optimal testosterone levels? Well, certainly some people have claimed that he does get TUEs, and that is allowed by UCAD. I mean, the fact of the matter is we don't know. But he is a heavily tested fighter. He hasn't popped. But does he have TUEs? I simply can't say. And I have no idea what we know that there's strict VADA testing in place for this fight coming up on December 7th. Lots of testing. I don't know what the Saudi Arabia, because they've had to obviously pull together, the sort of logistics of this and the commission and other bits and pieces. I don't know if they grant them. It is another country, another jurisdiction. Yeah, I don't know. So L-Dog says, Stipe, Miocic kills Fury in MMA. Miocic has a great chin and Fury doesn't punt very hard. I mean, there's a lot of guys, because it's a completely different dynamic when you're throwing elbows and knees and head kicks and other bits and pieces. It's not boxing. And for Fury, who in a boxing sense he moves well, but in some ways he's a bit Gumby in the way, some of those guys are just explosive. Fury doesn't really have that, and I think in MMA, because you got to have a strong ground game. It's not gonna. But even then, people would, because there's no ref to break you up. They'd just charge him and probably eat something on the way in, knowing that they're going to probably be able to get Fury to the ground and take him out. Fury to MMA, it's not happening. It's for PR, but it's good. It's great PR for him. So Right Hook Boxing says, I might start doing super chats, mate. The Kissum says, hook the like button, people. Hit the like button, people, I think. Please do, smash that like button if you're enjoying the content. The live stream, thank you for joining. So we've got 54 in the chat here, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for being part of the live stream. And if it's morning, noon, or night, whatever you're doing, hopefully you're having a great day. And slowly catching up on the chat here. We'll maybe go for about another 15 minutes or so. We'll just see how it goes. Got one or two other topics on the list. We'll see if we can cover them. I'll try to whip through the rest of these comments. So Angus says, I think Joseph Parker should fight Dominic Breazeale, knock him out in the first round, straight to a title shot, as well as JP has dropped to the 13th in the box rankings as well. See, the thing is, Dominic Breazeale, you can go, yeah, that's maybe an ideal candidate, and given his friendship with Izu Agono, it's kind of like you could build a narrative. But the thing is, they're in the wrong tent. I mean, Parker is with Matchroom, fighting on this 3-fight deal that he's got. Breazeale's with PBC, and for those reasons I can't see it happening. So Joey says, I think Chisora beats Ruiz. Discuss. No, I don't think that happens at all. I think there's a lot of people that are riding high on Derek Chisora right now, and this comes less than a year after he was pretty brutally knocked out by Dillian White. And I think people are overestimating those wins against Schott, Spilker, and Price. It's not exactly prime Price. And I know some people are sort of at me sort of saying, oh, you're hating on Derek Chisora, but I'm just trying to keep it real. I think there is a bit of a PR machine that's sort of been working a narrative that Chisora is all of a sudden this reformed character who's going to be a world beater. The evidence doesn't support that. Every time he stepped up to a level approaching world level, he's lost. And Adam is asking Joey to discuss how Chisora beats Ruiz. Yeah, I can't see it. So Big Dan says, who do you think will be the next pound for pound king? Depends who you like and for what reasons. Those lists always shift around. I'm not sure we've got any sort of consensus about who the number one is. I think after that performance, beating Kovalev, taking his belt at 175, a lot of people have Canelo as their number one, but there's a whole bunch of people that you could put in the top 5 and mix them around. So Joey has responded about the Ruiz-Chisora matchup. I think it's a perfect style for Chisora. They will trade and Ruiz will struggle with the heat. Yeah, I'm not so sure. Ruiz has got a pretty decent chin. Okay, just scrolling down here. Boxing Squared versus Boxing Ego. I would pay to see Squared obliterate him. I'm not even sure how big he is. He's quite tall, isn't he? Lou Buck says, I'd like to see fire against Tepper, Wallish, Schwartz. Well, in the context of the opposition that he's been facing, and of Vargas, who's fighting tomorrow, those guys, maybe Tepper, it would be probably, gettable, I don't know, but he needs to be facing someone on that next rung of the ladder. So Unga says, Aaron wants to make Loma versus Navarrete. That guy's got extremely long arms. I've seen him fight a number of times now. It almost looks like it's not like something's wrong. It's just that long, like sort of knuckles dragging on the ground almost. So Hayden says, can't tell me he came back not to... I'm not sure who you're talking to there. So George says, imagine Makhmudov versus Joshua at the Casino Montreal. That chin versus Arslan. I can't see that one happening. Arslan Beck, if it was maybe 3 years' time, but if the problem is, if it's at the Casino Montreal, I think at that point that probably means that Joshua's devolved into a fighter that, if you're at that venue, it would have to be... I think for the remainder of his career, even if Joshua loses this next fight to Ruiz, he's still going to be a draw. He's a popular fighter. All the support's not going to just drop away. He'll still be able to sell out places like the O2. I believe that. I think Joshua's still got a following that, there is some loyalty there. Sure, you're going to have some casuals sort of slough off and that, but I don't think a loss for Joshua is necessarily fatal against Andy Ruiz. I mean, if he puts up a credible performance, I think he can, go on, hold his head high. I think some of the narrative about, he has to retire after this, I mean, what's the basis for that? So Iman99 says, the only heavyweight I see moving to MMA, UFC successfully is White. He's got the kickboxing background. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a couple of guys that it sort of seems to be the ones that end up coming to boxing generally have had, like almost career-ending injuries. I think for Spong, for example, he had shattered his shin or something like that. There ends up being, they come to boxing because it's just basically a stand-up game type thing, as opposed to MMA where, I mean, some of the injuries there are just completely savage, and getting submitted and potentially having your arm broken and all sorts of injuries. It really is a brutal sport. But I think to have success in MMA, you need to come from one of those. I'm not going to say that I know heaps about MMA, but it sort of seems to be you've got to have a good background in either something like a wrestling or a martial arts discipline, and everything else is sort of built from that. So Lubak says Makhmedov would beat a lot of top 30 guys. Yeah, I mean, I think Aslanbek, Makhmedov, Daniel Dubois, Tony Yoka, Joe Joyce, F.A. Jagba, there's certainly a number of guys floating around in rankings, also in the sort of BoxRec top 30, that you just look at it and go, wouldn't even be competitive. I mean, that shows what sort of talent they've got. And I think for a lot of those guys, it's not just hype. There is something there that they're going to either outpoint someone and they're going to make it look pretty clinical, or they're going to just bang someone out of there. So George Michael, and this is on the Joshua and Makhmedov stuff, says Aslanbek would walk through Joshua's punches and throw Joshua out of the ring with uppercuts. Yeah, if you've seen some of those fights from Makhmedov from the amateur days, he does have a hell of a chin. I'm not going to dispute that at all. Makhmedov versus Hrgovic, who wins? Ooh, now that's a really interesting fantasy matchup. I mean, maybe that is one that could get made in a couple of years. I mean, because I think Hrgovic, with his skills, would have no trouble piecing Makhmedov up. But, if Hrgovic gets caught a few times, it could really be interesting. I'd like that fight. Yeah, that would be a sneaky good one for me. Okay, I lost my place in the chat. Just bear with me as I try to find it. So a lot of people talking up about Joshua and his chin. So Scott 70 says Tepper has been inactive but is training well. I mean, he'll be, at this point in his career, he'll be after some paydays too. So, I mean, you could see the likes of, I mean, we've seen I know Wallash's name was mentioned earlier. He's been sort of putting himself around fighting prospects and getting paydays this year. It's taking advantage of the decent looking record and I don't want to say selling it, but, in those fights against the likes of Jagba and Tony Yoka, you knew Wallace was going to lose, and he was trading on his resume to some extent. Adam Fahey says Inoue versus Navarrete should get made, but only once Inoue has cleared out of bantam. Yeah. Alan says, do you think KSI is Deontay Wilder's long-lost brother? Well, there were some parallels, and I know some people were doing graphics and comparing the two, and if you squinted your eyes, you could sort of see the windmilling. Yeah, that was... It was quite entertaining in the sense that KSI really just swinging for the fences, the literal definition of it. So Adam Pearce says, why has Kevin got a health bar and a glass of marshmallows? Who's Kevin? L-Dog says Morris Hooker is a lightweight with an 80-inch reach. That's more than Joseph Parker. Yeah, that is crazy. And he's another guy who looks, when you see him in the ring with those long levers. But that was one of those things in that Ramirez fight, because they just made it into a tear-up. He didn't really use some of that advantage that he did. So Adam Pearce says lots of K2 crossovers. Yeah, there certainly is. But as I was mentioning, some of that comes down to injuries too. So Tom Etheridge says Boxing Squared versus Eli Sekback, ESPN pay-per-view. Let's get it. Well, if we're going to do the Bob Arum model, we'll build it up for 2 years before we do it. So George Michael says, I agree, too young to retire. He has offensive weapons, but he needs to stop going down and avoid big shots. Very David Price-like, including amateur and sparring AJ down at 12 times now. I mean, really, we don't know how many times he's been down except for the professional ones and the one or two from sparring. But there's a lot of guys that do go down in sparring. We never hear about that. I mean, comparing Joshua to Price in some ways is quite disrespectful, because you look at what Joshua's achieved, and it sort of seems to be there's been a rewriting of the narrative from some fans discounting anything Joshua's ever done in the heavyweight division. He's fought some very good fighters and won, but I guess that's, you're only as good as your last loss, and if he gets beaten handily again, well, I guess fans will again turn on him, and it probably will be writing his obituary. Ruben Guerrero says that's true, boxing doesn't lend itself well to MMA. In terms of the striking, but because you've got to have so many disciplines, yeah, I'm not so convinced it does. I think you got to start from one of those disciplines, martial art disciplines, Seems to be there's so many, very good proponents of jiu-jitsu and other, disciplines like that have success. So Hayden says boxing needs to put on better fights because it's competing with MMA. They even waited with the Canelo fight, shows who the boss is. Yeah, I can see both sides of that, because that was a decent fight in MMA, and there would have been a number of boxing fans watching that. But I did think for those people who were in the audience, you're waiting for an MMA fight halfway across the country to finish before you can get your fight done. And it did, to me, like you sort of pointed out, the whole who's the boss thing. It shows that, and I'd even heard Dana White sort of say, I don't know why they went on that date and try to compete with us. I mean, he knows what they're... we don't necessarily get all the numbers and details out of UFC in terms of what they're doing, but clearly they've picked up a massive audience in recent years, and boxing is finding it hard to compete with it at some levels. But when one of the biggest cash cow in boxing, or the sort of one of the biggest names in boxing, Canelo Alvarez, is waiting for a UFC fight to finish, it does, I think, tell us that there's something wrong with boxing. So Adam Fahey says, I see Ramirez vs Postal is set in concrete now. Feb 1 in China. Time for Taylor to strike is straight after that. Yeah, Ramirez Taylor, that's a great fight. Ungus says bare knuckle boxing is growing as well. Yeah, it is. It's I think part of that has actually been YouTube, which is obviously the platform that we're on at the moment. I think some of that has influenced, the sort of street alley fights that, or the semi-organized fights. Someone's taken some of those fight rings that you see pop up on YouTube and other bits and pieces. You've probably watched some yourself. That has actually, I think, been contributing to the growth of that discipline of fighting. But going back to Hayden's comment, yeah, boxing doesn't help itself in terms of the fights, and we've just been talking about earlier, right throughout the live stream, about the need for more competitive matchups. But promoters and fighters and people involved with the whole kit and caboodle, they're so worried about working their way towards a title shot. Sometimes the need of the fan seems to get put secondary as opposed to positioning for a title, and that's why you might see someone on the way up, they're fighting all these mismatches, and you think they're good, you just don't know because they're not in a competitive matchup. I mean, the best don't fight the best often enough, and that certainly is one of the appeals that are of MMA that is starting to really cut into, well, not just cut into, it's really taking a chunk out of boxing, and a lot of people would rather see, competitive fights, and they'll go, I don't know who's going to win this. But the whole protecting your row, it's not a thing in MMA. So I think there's some lessons that can be taken, but I think, as we've all seen, the more people want things to change in boxing, the more they stay the same. But that's just because, the sanctioning bodies, the promoters, all that sort of stuff, they're still making money. They don't have a reason to, change the game, as it were. So L-Dog says, cancel Hrgovic, or I cancel my Patreon. I think that was the Makhmedov-Hrgovic one. That would be a great fight. That really would. I would favour Hrgovic to win that one. I think one of the things that's underrated about Hrgovic is he's got a good chin himself. I mean, everyone talks about Makhmedov's chin, but Hrgovic, he's got a good chin too. I think that would end up probably going to a decision and a wide points win for Hrgovic. But, Makhmedov with those right hands and those right uppercuts, which is like 90% of his arsenal, that would be entertaining. Skater says the Poms aren't used to having unbeaten fighters they still support. JJ says Dana White, John Fury, who you got? What sort of fight is it? Is it a street fight? I think John Fury would probably get up to some pretty dirty tactics on the street, but if it's a MMA fight, Dana White, I don't know. Well, what are the ground rules here? So Hayden says Fury would be a sick bare knuckle boxer as well as perfect for him and his genes. Yeah, in terms of, if there was anything that Tyson Fury would actually go to, I don't think it would be MMA, which I think he'd be, out of his depth there. But bare knuckle boxing, I think that, you could slide right into that. So Kennedy says, I think Joshua's chin is underestimated. And there was a big debate back and forth earlier in the chat, which I didn't really read through. I think there's much made of Joshua's chin, people saying that it's glass and all that sort of stuff. But if you go back and watch the Ruiz fight, he did take a number of big punches from Ruiz in there. And, it wasn't like everyone was hurting him. I think we have to remember that the first knockdown, which he never recovered from, was, he was hit up round by the ear. But in terms of chin overall, compared to some other heavyweights, I think you can clearly say someone like Joseph Parker's chin, one of the best in the division. Joshua's chin, it might just be average in the context where, of the fighters within the division. Doesn't mean he can't win fights though, and clearly he has before. So Skater says, now that cut he suffered will open up by a missed jab and bare knuckle. Oh, no, that could be something down the track that I could see Fury doing, but not before the rematch. So Adam says, I see the WBO stripped Bradis of its title for the WBSS Cruiserweight final. Winner to face Glavatsky inside 120 days of the final for the WBO strap. WBSS looking to make Bradis interim champ. Well, that was a bizarre fight. The refereeing wasn't good, and if you haven't caught that really was strange, and Robert Byrd was at the centre of that too. So Jason says, I want to see Wallen fight a top 10 heavyweight. Well, I think at the moment, Wallen's stock is up, so I see Wallen at the moment as someone who's about a top 30 guy. He needs to prove himself in the heavyweight division. He hasn't done that yet. At the end of the day, he cut Fury, and Fury had one eye hard to see out for the rest of the fight. He couldn't stop him, and he couldn't outpoint him. So I think some of the rhetoric about how he fought, I think for some people it was better than expected, but I knew Wallen was a decent fighter ahead of that fight, and I said he's probably going to do better than expected, but he's still got to prove himself. And if someone wants to ride his coattails of the hype that he's had off the back of that fight. Perfect time to do it, because I think a lot of guys in the top 10 smoke Otto Wallin. So Ruben Guerrero says, how do you see Spilka doing at cruiserweight? He was always a pretty good mover. Would that be better suited at cruiser? Yeah, I don't know. He's still going to get knocked out wherever he goes. Jason Maloney stops him, big liver shot. Those Maloney brothers are very talented. It's a shame that they haven't had more exposure, but I guess opportunities like this overpriced pay-per-view in Australia do give it to them. So Hayden says, Okoli looked trash in that last fight he saw. It's not that he don't win, it's just boring to watch. Yeah, Okoli, I really don't have a lot of patience for him. The sort of, tying up and hugging. It's a deliberate tactic. He's spoiling the action. And it was another forgettable performance. And all this sort of talk about fans aren't patient from Eddie Hearn, and he's doing all that, he's doing this, that and the other, he's going to be a world champion. He's probably going to have no fans either. So Adam says the cup of marshmallows and health bar is on the screen next to the chat feed. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, I'm not... That's just the stuff. This is a Streamlabs OBS. This is just the stuff that comes up on screen. So I can make them bigger and smaller. But yeah, those are just sort of... I don't even know what the Kevin Health Bar thing is for. So yeah, apologies for that. So any heavyweights this weekend, says JJ. Actually, we were touching on this just before. Not many. You've got Junior Fire and Hemia here. They're on a card in Utah this weekend, or this Friday night, I should say. But apart from that, there's a few other low-level fights, but nothing too much to write home about. The BoxRec schedule it's looking one of the lightest weekends of the year for heavyweight. So Big Chili says, Boxing Squared, what is the Kevin Health Bar? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's just a feature that comes part of the thing. Maybe something to do with the streaming health. I don't know. We'll have to... It's probably something really simple, and someone will be able to explain it in the chat. So Unga says, smash the like button, gents. Yes, please. That would be much appreciated. 45 in the chat. Thank you for joining me for this live stream. So Adam says, Spilka hasn't been near cruiserweight since 2009. Good luck to him. I mean, you can make a case that, because he fights around 220, 225. He doesn't really look too fleshy in there. You could maybe make a case that if he's losing that much weight to get down to cruiserweight, that's not going to help his punch resistance, which is not flash at the moment. Yeah, I mean, good luck to him. I mean, yeah, I can't see him making much noise in the heavyweight division, but maybe he can have a second life at cruiserweight. I don't know. And as Unga says, yeah, to be fair, he's got zero future at heavyweight. Yeah, especially, I mean, that brutal loss to Derek Chisora. Yeah, I mean, they still punch hard at cruiserweight, so it's not going to be like his chin issues are going to go away. So Skater says the social media trends UFC killed Canelo that whole weekend, tenfold on the night. DAZN used those analytics. They shat themselves. Well, it's probably was a big call in why they made that decision. But I guess to some extent it's another example that the health of boxing and how niche it's become in some ways is not, it's not good for whether the sport's not necessarily in the healthiest place that it's ever been in. And maybe sometimes as fans and dedicated boxing fans, we kind of put that sort of stuff aside because you hear all these stories about there's so much more money in the sport, there's more cards, and we get a lot of the good news boxing stories, but something like that and those sorts of stats do show you that there are other similar combat sports that are thriving at a time that boxing, to some extent, is stagnating. So Alexander Usyk says Hrgovic looks slow, robotic, Makhmudov deceptively rushes in with speed. I'm more sold on Makhmudov's chin and power also. Good fight but pointless. Two prospects, Makhmudov versus Amir Khan better. Or if it was Amir Khan and Makhmudov, Amir Khan will that will be a body on Makhmudov's record. That would be shattered glass. Unger says Loma versus Spilka. Jeez. Ruz Yaidi says Joseph Parker could win a title at cruiserweight. Now this is something I'm going to weigh in on. Ever since I started my channel back in mid-2017, consistently I'll get comments about Joseph Parker should drop down to cruiserweight. The dude is like, his fight weight, some of his lower fight weights in recent years have been, around 240 pounds. In some camps he's entered, camp at 260, 270. No way he's ever getting down to cruiserweight. Just no way. It's just not happening. And that's exactly what Adam Fahey has just said in the chat there. Yeah, he's not going to get down there. So Big Chili says, at Boxing Squared, what about White being removed from all but the WBC rankings? It's not new. It's not new. I mean, some of that also, he wasn't in the IBF rankings. He was dumped from them a year ago because he wouldn't face Pulev. He was dropped from the WBO after that news came out. And the WBA, yeah. I actually saw that somewhere, but they said he'd also been removed from the WBC rankings. It's not new though. He's been out of WBO and WBA rankings for a couple of months. L-Dog says Lomachenko is the franchise champion. Does this mean if he becomes fat and fights at heavyweight against another fat little guy, is he the new WBC heavyweight champ? That's a good question. I wonder if there is some sort of charter or, regulations or rules regarding the franchise champion, because you got to imagine at some point, if the franchise champ loses 2 or 3 fights in a row, can they take it from him? So Ruben says Warren versus Huey Fury. Yeah, that's not bad. I'm not sure it would be a very interesting fight though. Both like to sort of, stick and move. I'm not sure there'd be a lot of action. So Ruz Yaidi says Akoli vs Dorticus would be fun. Both big guys who can punch. Well, that's if Akoli's not, trying to make out with him and lay all over him. L-Dog says, I want to see Hrgovic get Huey Fury after Molina. I think Hrgovic stops Huey, which would definitely create some buzz. A lot of fights that could be made. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. Hopefully we get some in 2020. So Ruben says Loma inside 6 versus Spilka. Okay. Curious Carrot says, do you think Akoli's style will change with more experience? No. I think he is what he is. And that's exactly what Unger has just said. And that's become the default position for him too, is to just, fall in and hug and spoil. And it's dreadful. And he's probably, Eddie Hearn's right, he's probably going to win a cruiserweight title, but then have no fans and he'll be destined to be an undercard filler fighter. There is no way, some of the fights that he's had, he's just taken the air out of arenas, and, some people are just so anti-Lawrence Akoli now, which, say 18 months ago, he was this up-and-coming, exciting fighter, but once he got to a level where he had to compete to really get through and had to give it his best, he just defaults to, some of these bad habits, which is dreadful to watch. So Adam Fahey says, a burger flipper with a punch who loves a hug. Ruthless. And Gassiev versus Akoli. Gassiev by Big KO says Unger. Gassiev by Crushing KO says Adam Fahey. Unger again, if Gassiev doesn't get pregnant first. What? Lawrence Akoli is not actually the most elusive fighter in there either. But it would be interesting against a guy like, but then again, Gassiev's at heavyweight now, so we're probably not going to see that fight. And Gassiev's another guy who's just kind of listed and fallen off the map since coming up to heavyweight, having injuries. You know, he was meant to have a couple of fights against the Weko, hasn't happened. Since his run in the World Boxing Super Series, like Usyk, it's just kind of, the momentum's just kind of gone out of the balloon. The air's all gone out of the balloon for him and Usyk to some extent. L-Dog says, Okoli KOs him in a Fight of the Year candidate. Canelo versus Okoli. Well, imagine those body shots if Okoli tried to fall in. Adam says Gassiev injures himself eating dinner. WB says Gassiev useless, slow feet, slow hands, heavy hands, no jab, low output, quite green. And Unger says, but has power and a set of whiskers. Okay, so JJ says KSI, Logan Paul, best watch boxing fight of this year. The world is crazy. Well, it says a lot about the state of boxing to some extent. A couple of guys with limited experience from YouTube can come on and just, make a whole pile of money out of the sport of boxing, and yeah, that is crazy to some extent. So Audi alias TT says, good morning BS, cold and raining in London, Dillian has been erased from existence from sanctioning organisation. Where's all this coming from? He's been out of some of the rankings for a couple of months. In terms of WBC, he was confirmed as number one just the other week, a couple of weeks ago at the WBC conference. So let's not get ahead of ourselves on what is or isn't happening. But often one sanctioning body does one thing, another does another, and we don't get an explanation. Who knows? So Bakoli versus Wallen is a good matchup, says Lubak. Probably ending in a Bakoli KO. So Adam says a bit tougher on a former unified cruiserweight champion. Okay, not sure what that was in reference to. So Audi alias says Spider-Man cannot make cruiser. I can't see it. Can't see Joseph Parker going down. So WB says, if you believe in Parker's ability, you have to rate White as White won that fight. Yeah, it was a good win for White. And he follows up of the contenders. White has the most brief amateur record and is very competitive despite that. Yeah, but it's not like he didn't have any fighting experience. He was a kickboxer after all. But he's been a pro for several years now, so I don't think some of these arguments after several years about limited amateur experience, at some point you just have to go, well, you're a professional, you're making your living, you're either good enough or you're not. So Neil says Hearn is going to make the WBO strip Ruiz if he wins so Usyk can get it. Well, I guess it depends. Does Ruiz want to keep that, or will he want to fight for the IBF over that? It may not have anything to do with Eddie Hearn, because if there's a thing with PBC and the WBO belt, they might just let it go. So Ruben says, do you think Pulev can beat any of the fringe level guys or prospect guys now, or is he done at that level holding out on a payday? Might be one or two of the sort of, best 4 or 5 prospects he might be able to outpoint. I mean, he is crafty. Didn't look great in that last fight, but doesn't mean he can't get up for a big fight. But yeah, I think he'll probably retire if he gets iced next year. So Lubak says Parker would struggle to get below 220 pounds. I agree. So Jason says White hurt Parker with a headbutt early on. And Adam says, I think Parker beats White in a rematch. Almost beat him the first fight. That was a very good fight. One of the better fights in 2018, I should say. So Audi says, I had no idea KSI and Logan Paul were considered champions. Watched the spectacle yesterday. Reality TV. Well, it was, and it made them a lot of money. Ruben says, Hergovich sleeps Huey. Audi alias TT says, Adam, you must have faith in him. For Parker, that is. And Scott asked the $1 million question, is White going to be back? Who knows? I think they've been wanting, because remember, in early October, there was hints coming out from Eddie Hearn that, and to Dillian Whyte to some extent, because he sort of emerged from that sort of self-imposed, there was no interviews, there wasn't a lot of sort of stuff on social media, and they seemed to be painting a narrative that the whole thing was going to be wrapped up and resolved in a few weeks after that, and it just hasn't happened. We know that UKAD is very thorough with these things and doesn't produce any results or whatever before time, but yeah, this whole thing hanging over his head, it's not good for his career. If he's cleared, then obviously it's, you know, all this sort of talk of what's been going on, not good for him. But if he's guilty, well, we'll have to see what happens next. But this whole people not knowing, that's the thing. So WB says, I think Akoli looked great. There's an art to holding. It's fantastic skill for any heavyweight. Vladimir actually used it very well. He did, but I think has Akoli taken it to a new level? Some of these fights, just, KSI versus Usyk, both undisputed cruiserweight champions. He could avenge Bellew. Adam says he outboxed White in the first 2 rounds. The headbutt clearly changed the fight. Parker looked like he was on a boat. I think KD from White in round 8 or 9 helped Parker clear the head a bit. Well, I was surprised that he got up from that, because that really was, it was a massive left hook. So JJ says Ortiz looks scary. Is Wilder in trouble? We'll have to see. I mean, maybe he's been overlooked to some extent. He's grown a new haircut. Looks about 10 years younger. I want to say that Ortiz is, you know, really in that fight, but it does feel to me that Deontay Wilder is going to be better. He is better now than he was 18 months ago, and I think he will knock him out. I don't know. But I did want to put across that other side of the story, and the whole, you know, is Ortiz being overlooked, and what are, you know, the traits that he can bring to the fight to, you know, to use to his advantage. Because I think there has been just kind of a dismissing of Ortiz by a lot of fans. I think it would probably be a better fight than maybe some people are expecting, but it just might go the same way, but just an earlier finish. So Caledonian Wolf says, good morning from Scotland. Predictions for S. Okay, I'm not sure what that is. WB says, I agree, little anxious, but Green, good power though, and gaining some wins. Well done, Akoli. That holding is very effective. I can tell you're an Akoli fan. You're one of the few Hardy fans that exist. Jason Landis says, did you see Ortiz in the cryogenic tank? I'm sure there will be some memes that will circulate the rounds from those sorts of photos when they emerge. So Adam Fahey says White could fight a top 30 on the Ruiz bill. So if Eddie Hearn has mentioned top 30, that really means it's probably about top 60. He does tend to exaggerate. It would just, I mean, White, if he goes on any bill next month, it's going to be a tune-up. That's really what it is. Oh, AJ versus Ruiz. Says Caledonian Wolf. Yeah, it's a 50-50 fight for me. I mean, if Joshua can implement a disciplined game plan in that fight and, you know, keep it long, he's got a very good shot of, you know, winning that fight by a decision and, you know, tempting Ruiz in, making him make some mistakes. But if Joshua fights from the mid-range and, you know, fights small and allows Ruiz just to walk in, because even ahead of that shot in the 3rd round, Ruiz was just closing the distance at will. And I mentioned that on my 10 things to watch for video. That was one of those things that when I rewatched it, I was just like, Ruiz was effectively coming in and doing what he wanted. I mean, that jab of Joshua's, he's got to really turn that into something to at least make Ruiz think twice about jumping in. So AA Boxing and Blunt says, is Dillian still interim champ? Well, the interim championship and the mandatory status are currently sort of suspended pending whatever happens with UKAD. So once the results of whatever UKAD is doing relating to White and the whole situation, that will be forwarded on by White, presumably, and his team to the WBC, because UK won't send anything to the WBC. They don't have to. So it'll him having the interim champion status back as well as the mandatory, which he'll be the mandatory for 2021 if it all goes his way, which feels like a punishment in itself as well. But yeah, nothing happens for the moment until there's more information. So, and because he became the interim champion, the silver title that he did hold went back to the pool, and that's the one that Dubois is fighting for, and the one Charles Martin thought he was going to be fighting for. White was stripped of interim. No, he wasn't stripped of the interim. Those two have basically, it's on hold for the moment. It's suspended for the moment, but if everything comes up Dillian White in his favour, it's reinstated. But it hasn't been stripped or taken away from him. It's just like effectively in a hiatus, so he can't sort of put them up. Adam Fahey says White, if cleared by UCAD and the WBC, will be reinstated. Yeah, just what I was saying there. Ashley Everly says that Coldy has some power, though. He does have power, but I mean, half the time he's smothering and spoiling his own work. But he can crack, and he could do some damage at heavyweight, but he's not going to be in a lot of fan-friendly fights if he continues fighting the way that he does. So Ashley says White's back in December. Eddie said a strong possibility. Well, we've been hearing that for a while, so we'll have to see what firms up. I mean, there was a point where Dillian White just a couple of weeks ago ruled out going on Joshua's card. So I don't know. It seems to be a little bit all over the place, and the possibilities of it kind of depends, I guess, maybe for the whole UCAD situation, because it might be that because of that got that card, I believe, in the United States. That may be somewhere, have a tune-up of some description. But it won't be a top 30 guy. I'd be shocked. So AA Boxing and Blunt says, Boxing Squared, if you follow Stamina for Sale on YouTube, they've had Dillian on podcasts over the last month. Worth a watch. Thanks for that. I will check that out. Hall and Gallen just walked out. You're missing out on an exciting young prospect in Barry Hall. What is he, like 42 years old? Where are we here in the chat here? White versus DeWicko. Well, actually, that would not surprise me. DeWicko has been calling for some big fights, and after the whole stuff with Gassiev falling over a couple of times, that might be a good sort of make-up fight to give him. And I'm sure DeWicko would fancy his chances, but that does not mean he's going to win. So Adam says, in the limited clips of Joshua I've seen, he really looks 236 to 240. Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to be about 240 on fight night. 2-minute rounds for Gallen and Hall. Wow. And they're making off like bandits. Okay, so I've caught up on the chat. Apologies, I skipped down, so if I've missed a few comments, apologies for that. But we're coming up to the 2-hour mark, and we've got this fight in Australia. I'm sure that there's just a lot of interest for some in the chat here to watch. But I'll leave it there. But thank you for joining the chat, being part of the live stream. You can tell I'm getting tired. It's 11:30 here, long day. Apologies for that, but have a great weekend wherever you are in the world. If it's morning, noon or night, take care, have a good weekend, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks very much.